A reputable judge finds a young guy guilty and sentences him to 50 years in prison. But when a long-lost piece of evidence turns up again, it exposes a network of corruption so extensive that it upends the legal system. That day, Richmond, New York, had a full courtroom. The weight of the impending choice, in addition to the summer heat, made the air heavy. Judge Terrence Walker, a man whose reputation preceded him, was the center of attention. His judgment was quick, stern, and by all accounts unalterable. He was not known for mercy or second chances. His face, which was as chiseled as his verdicts after 31 years on the bench, was 58 years old, a tribute to the innumerable lives he had changed with the swing of his gavel. Derek Cole, 28, the defendant, stood at the defense table with a steady gaze and slightly shaking hands. His expression was the result of a lifetime of striving to prove oneself. Even when he was arrested for the armed robbery of a jewelry store that left one guy seriously hurt, Cole insisted that he was innocent. His voice wouldn't matter today, though. Judge Terrence said, "Mr. Cole," his rich baritone resonating around the room, "you stand convicted by a jury of your peers for crimes that have caused irreparable harm to this community. Your actions were not only reckless, but calculated, and you have shown no remorse." In the rear row, Cole's mother choked back a cry. She had pleaded with the court to take into account the son she had nurtured, the youngster who had once aspired to be a firefighter, and to view him as more than just a case number. However, the evidence had been stronger. Surveillance footage, eyewitness reports, and an anonymous tip had all contributed to his demise. Judge Terrence slammed his gavel against the oak block and pronounced, "I hereby sentence you to 60 years in state prison." The sound reverberated, definitive and conclusive. Cole remained still, his lips drawn into a thin line, as though he were restraining himself from saying something he knew would never make a difference. Whispers, gasps, and the shuffle of reporters taking notes filled the room. For Cole, however, the world had become silent. His shackled footsteps faded down the corridor as he turned to give his mother one more glance before being led away. Judge Terrence closed the door against the commotion and went back to his chambers. He poured a cup of black coffee for himself and gazed at the swirling liquid as though it held the solution. It had been a hard day, but he believed that justice had been done. He had no idea that the truth he had just buried would soon clamber to the surface and refuse to remain hidden. It had been a memorable trial. For weeks it grabbed headlines and was nicknamed the Cole robbery case by local news outlets. A masked shooter stormed into Blackstone's Jewelers in downtown Richmond on a busy Thursday afternoon, brandishing a pistol and taking more than $200,000 worth of stolen items. The crime itself was a spectacle. Samuel Gaines, a store clerk, was caught in the crossfire and was battling for his life as a result of the turmoil. 2 weeks after the robbery, Derek Cole, a part-time mechanic with no past criminal history, was taken into custody. Authorities received a tip from an anonymous caller who said Cole matched the description of the suspect who was saw running from the area. By linking him to the stolen items found in a storage facility registered in his name, the prosecution created a scathing image. Cole's defense lawyer, chosen by the court, found it difficult to overcome the overwhelming amount of evidence. Eyewitnesses who claimed to have recognized Cole's voice, blurry surveillance film of a man with a similar build and walk, and, possibly most damning of all, fingerprints discovered on the weapon left at the scene. Cole, however, insisted on his innocence. He informed the jurors, "I didn't do this," when he testified. When his boss acknowledged on the testimony that he was unable to confirm Cole's movements for the whole day, his alibi, that he was working a double shift at the auto shop that day, was called into question. "I wasn't anywhere near that store. I've never even touched a gun." The final arguments from the prosecution were scathing and brutal. The district attorney paced in front of the jury and said, "This is a man who thought he could outsmart the law." Cole's defense, on the other hand, felt weak, nearly beaten. But the evidence doesn't lie. The fingerprints don't lie. The witnesses don't lie. However, his lawyer's voice lacked conviction, and the jury was unmoved. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he begged, "there are holes in this case. Doubts, isn't that enough to give this young man the benefit of the doubt?" It took fewer than 3 hours to deliberate. It was found guilty on all charges. As the foreperson read the ruling, Cole did not flinch, but his jaw tightened, revealing the storm that was building inside of him. As unbiased as ever, Judge Terrence readied himself to impose a punishment that he believed was appropriate. In his courtroom, he had witnessed seasoned criminals who had perfected the art of deceit. Cole was the same to him. As though looking for some indication of regret or atonement, his eyes darted throughout the courtroom before settling on Cole. It seemed as though the room itself cooled when the words was delivered. Cole and his mother experienced destruction, while the victims and their relatives experienced relief. The voice of the system had been harsh. Later that evening, however, Judge Terrence had a slight nagging sensation that he was unable to pinpoint as he signed the sentencing documents. Disregarding it, he attributed it to exhaustion. Judge Terrence was unaware that the trial was only the first step. The true narrative was waiting for him, right in front of him, and it was going to make all the difference. It began on an ordinary Wednesday night. The untidy piles of case papers and legal briefs were illuminated by the warm glow of a desk lamp as Judge Terrence sat in his study. He had been thinking about retirement lately, but he had stuff to do tonight. He had just received a new case involving police wrongdoing, and the accusations were serious enough to demand his full attention. He was looking through the papers when he noticed an evidence log from a previous investigation. It was initially only a fleeting glance, a pointless detail in the vast ocean of documents. Then Derek Cole's name jumped out at him. Terrence frowned as he reclined in his chair. Names reappearing in unrelated cases was not rare, but this felt different. His pulse accelerated as he turned the page. The record listed things seized from a different robbery investigation that had occurred about the same time as the Blackstone's jewelers case, and it described the inventory of a police evidence locker. One object caught our attention: a rifle. The weapon used in the robbery for which Cole had been found guilty fit the description. The issue? This pistol hadn't even been discussed during Cole's trial, let alone presented as evidence. With the weight of his findings bearing down on him, Terrence leaned forward. Still vivid in his mind, he compared the serial number to the trial paperwork. The make and barrel scratches were exactly the same. However, according to the report, 2 days after the crime, this pistol was taken during an unrelated arrest. His heart pounding as he tried to piece together the ramifications, he whispered under his breath, "How is that possible? This gun could not have been used in the robbery of Blackstone's jewelers if it had been in police custody. And whose fingerprints were on it if it wasn't the weapon?" He had a nagging suspicion that something was wrong. Terrence was well aware of how easy important information may be overlooked because he had spent decades navigating the complex legal system. However, this felt deliberate, not an error. He asked for the complete case file for the unrelated crime because he was determined to find answers. The following morning, a substantial folder filled with witness accounts, police reports, and photos came. The threads started to come loose the deeper Terrence dug. The detective who had testified at Cole's trial was also the arresting officer in the unrelated case. Then there was the tip from an unnamed source. During the trial, Terrence had hardly thought about it, but now it was blatantly strange. His anxiety increasing by the hour, he asked for a subpoena for the tip line records. When at last the papers showed up, Terrence's blood froze. The call had been from a burner phone registered in the same detective's identity, not from a random citizen. When he realized that Derek Cole had been set up, the walls of his office appeared to shut in on him. Both the testimony and the proof had been contrived. The notion of the 60-year sentence Terrence had imposed and the broken life of a young guy who might have been innocent all along made his stomach turn. Upholding the law was something Terrence had always taken pride in, but now it felt like quicksand underfoot. The road ahead was dangerous, but he understood what needed to be done. Terrence decided to go deeper at all costs as the gravity of his revelation began to sink in. He wasn't going to let the reality get in the way of his plans. Since discovering the inconsistencies in Derek Cole's case, Judge Terrence had not slept much. His nights ended with a notebook full of hurriedly scrawled notes, and his mornings started with piles of legal documents. However, the picture grew darker the more he looked at it. When Terrence met retired Detective Ethan Blake, an old colleague, for coffee in a dimly lit cafe off Highway 101, it was the first break in the wall. Terrence presented his research. Blake, who had an aptitude for spotting corruption and a no-nonsense attitude, listened carefully. Terrence Blake stated, "This isn't just negligence," as he put down his coffee mug. "If what you're saying is true, someone went to great lengths to make sure that kid took the fall." Terrence gave a somber nod. Blake agreed to assist, and the two were neck-deep in police files, witness statements, and internal memos in a matter of days. "I need proof, Dan. Solid proof. Falsified reports, missing evidence records, and witness testimony that had been changed to support the prosecution's story were among the startling things they discovered. Terrence was particularly interested in one witness, a store clerk who had first named another man as the suspect before altering his testimony to blame Cole. Blake followed the man to a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. His narrative exploded out of him when they challenged him. The man admitted, "I didn't want to do it," with shaking hands. "But Detective Nathan pressured me, said if I didn't, I'd be arrested for obstruction. I didn't have a choice." Terrence felt a surge of rage at the name, Detective Nathan. It was the same cop who had hidden the evidence and filed the fraudulent tip. As they investigated further, Terrence and Blake discovered a pattern. Nathan had a history of using dubious methods, including threatening witnesses, making up evidence, and forcing confessions. Nevertheless, his record was impenetrable due to the numerous layers of bureaucratic red tape. When Blake was able to retrieve deleted emails from Nathan's police account, it was a breakthrough. Particularly noteworthy was an email that was sent to the district attorney and contained a strategy for guaranteeing a conviction in the Blackstone's jewelers case. A list of falsified evidence and altered witness testimony was attached. As he read the email, Terrence became enraged. He had dedicated his life to a system that was fundamentally flawed. Nevertheless, he had the evidence he needed to take action, so there was no time for hopelessness. But it would be difficult to reveal the truth. Terrence was aware that going public may cost him everything, including his safety, reputation, and job. And Nathan had strong supporters in the department. But the choice was obvious when he considered Derek Cole sitting in a jail cell for a crime he didn't commit. "We go public," Terrence informed Blake one evening when they were going over their results. "No matter what it takes." Terrence attached the damaging information against Nathan to a motion to reopen Cole's case the following day. The courthouse was rocked by the action, but Terrence wasn't finished. Additionally, he submitted a formal complaint to the Department of Justice, requesting that Nathan and the Richmond Police Department be the subject of an independent inquiry. The reaction was quick. Terrence was warned to back down by anonymous threats. His co-workers turned against him, and the media started to doubt his intentions. However, Terrence remained steadfast. There was no going back now that the truth was out. Terrence understood, however, that the battle was far from done as the storm gathered around him. The most difficult battles were still to come. Judge Terrence's motion had immediate and devastating consequences. Accusations of corruption within the Richmond Police Department dominated local media, and public indignation quickly grew. Terrence felt the heat of scrutiny directed at him for the first time in decades. Some hailed him as a hero for his pursuit of justice, while others accused him of betraying the system he had vowed to defend. Public opinion, however, wasn't the only thing that worked against him. Terrence started getting calls at strange times, with a long pause before the line died. Terrence was aware of the dangers of seeking the truth, but he hadn't anticipated the threats to intensify so rapidly. One morning, he went outside to discover his car tires cut, with a crude note written on the windshield. "Drop it or else." He would not be intimidated, however. The type of institutional flaws he was presently dealing with had destroyed far too many lives. Young, determined, and heartbreakingly resigned to a fate he hadn't earned, Derek Cole's face tormented his mind. Detective Nathan, meanwhile, was not giving up easily. Nathan refuted the accusations through his lawyer, saying Terrence's action was a slanderous attempt to damage his reputation. In a television appearance, Nathan proclaimed, "This is nothing more than a vendetta," his polished manner standing in sharp contrast to the mounting evidence against him. Terrence's jaw tensed in annoyance as he watched the interview from his living room. He had the truth, which Nathan lacked, but the lies were audacious and well thought out. As the inquiry went on, Blake discovered a crucial piece of evidence: security camera footage taken the day of the crime from a parking lot close to the jewelry store. A man who fit Nathan's physical description was seen leaving the area with a duffel bag in the video, which had for some reason never been shown before the trial. As Terrence went over the tape, his heart was racing. It was incriminating as well as exculpatory. The parts came together with this. Nathan had planned the heist personally. It had not been a haphazard act of violence. The next move was obvious yet risky. In order to present the new evidence, Terrence requested an urgent hearing. As the video aired on a screen in front of the crowded gallery, the courtroom was tense. The throng erupted in gasps as the knowledge dawned on them. The response was swift. Reporters rushed to record the moment, their flashes lighting up the courtroom like strobe lights. "This man," Terrence said, pointing to the screen, "is the same detective who led the investigation against Derek Cole. He manipulated the evidence, coerced witnesses, and framed an innocent man to cover his own tracks." Nathan and his lawyer sat in the gallery, looking defiant but pallid. He said, "You're making a mistake, Terrence," as he was led away in handcuffs. "You don't know what you've started." Terrence was shaken but determined after the encounter. Now that a higher court had taken up the issue, Derek Cole's conviction was being reconsidered. Terrence, however, was aware that this was only the start of a much bigger conflict. Terrence became aware of the gravity of what he had discovered as the courtroom began to empty. The battle for justice was far from ended, even if the truth was out. The atmosphere felt different when Judge Terrence sat in the same courtroom as Derek Cole's sentencing a few weeks later. Reporters, campaigners, and Cole's family were crammed into the gallery, waiting for the retrial judge to render a verdict. Cole sat calmly at the defense table, looking older and thinner than he had been while incarcerated. He maintained a solid posture and an unblinking stare despite the suffering. As Terrence observed the young man at the heart of this tempest, who had gone through so much because of a crime he hadn't done, a lump formed in his throat. The evidence uncovered by Terrence and Blake was indisputable. The surveillance footage, fabricated reports, and forced statements all suggested a network of corruption that had set Cole up and protected the true perpetrators. The crowd erupted in cries and cheers when the presiding judge declared that Cole's conviction will be overturned. Cole's mother hurried to greet him as he stood, his hands shaking. Time appeared to pause for a second. Terrence gave himself a rare smile as he sat calmly in the rear of the courtroom. The trek had been costly, but justice had finally been served. The fallout was widespread in the days that followed. An independent investigation of the Richmond Police Department exposed a corrupt culture that had been allowed to continue unchecked for years, and Detective Nathan was charged with a crime for his activities. Terrence's part became a rallying cry for responsibility within the legal system, and the case fueled calls for reform across the country. Terrence continued to be introspective in spite of the praise. He was aware that this triumph was only one part of a much bigger picture. Even though the system he had previously relied on had flaws, he was resolved to work for its improvement for the remainder of his career. Cole, on the other hand, was just getting started. He vowed to devote his life to assisting those who had been wrongfully imprisoned after being released from the burden of a wrongful conviction. His tale served as a ray of hope for anyone who valued tenacity and the search for the truth. The tale of Judge Terrence and Derek Cole serves as a potent reminder that justice is not always perfect. It calls for alertness, bravery, and a readiness to face hard realities. If this story touched you, think about lending your support to groups that promote systemic change and fight to release those who have been wrongly condemned. For more stories that upend our preconceived notions and inspire us, remember to subscribe to our channel. For sometimes the battle for justice starts in the courts and doesn't finish there.